Welcome to War Bios, the podcast that delves into the most pivotal conflicts in history, where strategy, leadership, and circumstance converge to shape the fate of nations. I'm your host, General Biography, and today we're going to explore one of the most fascinating battles of the Korean War, the Battle of Chipyponi, Army's 23rd Regimental Combat Team. The origins of the Battle of Chipyponi are deeply rooted in the larger context of the Korean War, which began on June 25, 1950, when North Korean forces, backed by China and the Soviet Union, crossed the 38th parallel into South Korea. The United Nations, led by the United States, intervened on behalf of South Korea, leading to a protracted and bloody conflict. By the winter of 1951, the war had reached a critical phase, with both sides suffering heavy casualties and the UN forces struggling to maintain their foothold on the Korean peninsula. The Korean winter of 1950-1951 was one of the harshest on record, with temperatures plummeting to 30 degrees Celsius, 22 degrees Celsius, and snowdrifts reaching as high as 10 feet, 3 meters. These conditions would prove disastrous for both sides, as they struggled to maintain supply lines, keep troops warm, and wage war in the treacherous terrain. In January 1951, the Chinese People's Volunteer Army, PVA, led by General Peng Dehuai, launched a massive counterattack against the UN forces, pushing them back across the 30th parallel and into South Korea. The PVA's numerical superiority and familiarity with the terrain allowed them to make significant gains, forcing the UN command to regroup and reassess its strategy. As the PVA advanced, the U.S. 8th Army, led by General Matthew Ridgway, was tasked with holding the line against the Communist forces. In early February 1951, the USC 23rd Regimental Combat Team, part of the 2nd Infantry Division, was deployed to Chipyponi, a small village located in the heart of the Korean countryside. The regiment's mission was to secure the area, prevent further PVA advances, and protect the vital supply lines that kept the UN forces operational. The village of Chipyponi itself was a strategic location, situated at the intersection of two key roads, the Seoul-Chuncheon Highway and the Yangpyeong-Hongcheon Road. Control of these roads would grant the PVA access to the port city of Incheon and the South Korean capital, Seoul, making it a crucial objective for both sides. The UN forces, led by seasoned commanders like Colonel Paul L. Freeman Jr., were determined to hold their ground against the relentless PVA onslaught. Meanwhile, the PVA, driven by their ideological fervor and numerical superiority, were willing to sacrifice thousands of troops to achieve their strategic objectives. The historical context of the Battle of Chipyponi is also marked by the evolving nature of modern warfare. The Korean War was one of the first conflicts to feature extensive use of artillery, air power, and mechanized infantry, which would play a significant role in shaping the outcome of the battle. The UN forces, led by courageous commanders like Colonel Freeman, were about to face their greatest challenge yet, a desperate battle for survival against overwhelming odds. It's February 1951, and the U.S. 23rd Regimental Combat Team, part of the 2nd Infantry Division, has been deployed to Chipyponi, a small village in the Korean countryside, with a mission to secure the area, prevent further advances by the Chinese People's Volunteer Army, PVA, and protect vital supply lines. The UN forces, led by seasoned commanders like Colonel Paul L. Freeman Jr., were determined to hold their ground against the relentless PVA onslaught, despite being outnumbered. The PVA, driven by ideological fervor and numerical superiority, was willing to sacrifice thousands of troops to achieve its strategic objectives. One of the key factors that influenced the outcome of the battle was the innovative use of artillery by the UN forces. The 23rd Regimental Combat Team had at its disposal a range of artillery pieces, including the M101 howitzer and the M19 multiple rocket launcher, which provided critical firepower against the PVA's massed infantry attacks. The UN forces also made extensive use of air power, with fighter bombers like the F-51 Mustang and the F-80 Shooting Star providing close air support to troops on the ground. The battle itself was a series of intense engagements that took place over several days in mid-February 1951. On February 13, the PVA launched a massive assault on the UN positions at Chipyponi with waves of infantry attacking across open fields and through the village itself. The UN forces held their ground, inflicting heavy casualties on the PVA through a combination of artillery fire, small arms, and close air support. Despite being outnumbered, the UN forces were able to maintain their defensive perimeter, thanks in large part to the courageous leadership of Colonel Freeman and his officers. The regiment's defense was characterized by a series of fortified positions, including foxholes, bunkers, and barbed wire entanglements, which provided protection against the PVA's infantry attacks. As the battle raged on, the UN forces began to gain the upper hand thanks to their superior firepower and tactical discipline. On February 15, a counterattack led by the U.S. 23rd Regimental Combat Team and supported by air power and artillery broke through the PVA lines, pushing the enemy back and securing key terrain features around Chipyponi. The human cost of the battle was significant, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. The UN forces lost over 1,000 troops killed or wounded, while estimates suggest that the PVA suffered between 5,000 to 7,000 casualties. Despite these losses, the UN victory at Chipyponi marked a turning point in the Korean War, as it demonstrated that the Communist forces could be defeated through determined resistance and innovative tactics. The battle showcased the evolving nature of modern warfare, with the extensive use of artillery, air power, and mechanized infantry playing a significant role in shaping its outcome. The UN victory at Chipyponi marked a significant turning point in the conflict, demonstrating that the Communist forces could be defeated through determined resistance and innovative tactics. In the immediate aftermath of the battle, the United Nations Command began to consolidate its gains, securing key terrain features around Chipyponi and preparing for future operations against the Chinese People's Volunteer Army, PVA. The U.S. 23rd Regimental Combat Team, which had borne the brunt of the fighting at Chipyponi, was relieved by fresh troops, allowing it to rest and refit after its grueling ordeal. The PVA, on the other hand, was forced to regroup and reassess its strategy in light of its defeat at Chipyponi. The Communist forces had suffered heavy casualties, estimated at between 5,000 to 7,000 troops, and their morale had taken a significant blow. Despite these setbacks, the PVA remained committed to its goal of driving the United Nations Command out of Korea, and it began to plan for future operations against the UN forces. One of the key consequences of the Battle of Chipyponi was the shift in the strategic balance of power on the Korean peninsula. The UN victory had demonstrated that the Communist forces could be defeated, and this had a significant impact on the morale and confidence of the UN troops. The UN troops command began to take a more aggressive approach, launching a series of operations aimed at driving the PVA back and securing key terrain features. The Battle of Chipyponi also had significant implications for the broader course of the Korean War. The UN victory marked a turning point in the conflict, as it demonstrated that the Communist forces could be defeated through determined resistance and innovative tactics. This realization helped to shift the focus of the war from a purely defensive strategy to a more offensive approach, with the UN command seeking to take the initiative and drive the PVA back. In terms of specific operations, the aftermath of the Battle of Chipyponi saw a series of UN initiatives aimed at securing key terrain features and driving the PVA back. One notable example was Operation Ripper, launched in March 1951, which aimed to secure the town of Hongcheon and drive the PVA out of the surrounding area. The operation was successful, with UN forces securing the town and inflicting significant casualties on the PVA. Another key consequence of the Battle of Chipyponi was the impact it had on the diplomatic efforts to bring an end to the war. The UN victory marked a significant shift in the balance of power on the Korean peninsula, and this helped to create an environment in which negotiations could take place. In July 1951, representatives from the United Nations Command and the PVA met at Kaesong to begin talks aimed at bringing an end to the conflict. The negotiations were fraught with difficulty, but they ultimately led to the signing of the Armistice Agreement on July 27, 1953, which brought an end to hostilities in Korea. The agreement established a ceasefire and created the Korean Demilitarized Zone, DMZ, which has remained in place to this day. In conclusion, the aftermath of the Battle of Chipyponi marked a significant turning point in the Korean War, demonstrating that the communist forces could be defeated through determined resistance and innovative tactics. The UN victory had a profound impact on the strategic balance of power on the Korean peninsula, shifting the focus of the war from a purely defensive strategy to a more offensive approach. That's all for today's War Bios. Remember to like, share, and subscribe, and until next time, I'm General Biography reminding you to keep marching toward victory.